Well, Browns fans, it's another week and unfortunately another loss for your Cleveland Browns. They dropped to 2-8 on the season. And where do we begin? There's a lot to cover from this one. 35-14, the final score in New Orleans. I'm obviously coming to you live from the Superdome, where hours ago the Browns did take that loss. And it was a game that was pretty interesting in a lot of fronts. You know, there was the storylines about Jameis Winston returning to New Orleans after spending the previous 4 years with this franchise, and sort of the reunion that was going to be, and what sort of reception would he get, and what sort of show would he put on. And he certainly put on a show today. He completed, I believe it was 30 of his 46 passes for 395 yards and 2 touchdowns, the only 2 scores that the Browns had. He led a couple other drives that were in scoring range, but Dustin Hopkins missed field goals, which we'll talk about here coming up. And it was just about, I think, a good common theme that came out of the locker room afterwards from Wyatt Teller, most notably, was just finishing. It was a problem for the Browns to finish their drives today with points, but also just to finish the game, because it was a 14-14 score. The Browns kind of rallied back and made it interesting going into the fourth quarter. And then the Saints outscored them 21-0 in that final stanza. We hear so much in the NFL about how the fourth quarter matters the most, almost like how the end of the season, the month of December, matters so much for these teams. And to see it sort of fall apart the way that it did was obviously disappointing for the Browns. And, you know, they thought they were going to be able to sort of get off the second half of the season on a good note, even though it was a long shot that they made the playoffs and all these things anyway. They wanted to get this win. They wanted to sort of build some traction and sort of set the tone for the rest of the season, no matter what happened. And instead, they fell flat on their face with many of the same issues that have plagued them this year. And so I'll put the sort of, to tie a bow on Jameis' performance, I thought it was a special day for him. And to see him do what he did, you'd think, hearing those numbers, that he would have done more, or that the offense would have done more than only score the 2 touchdowns that they did score. So it was an unfortunate way for his efforts to sort of go down, because again, you feel like the offense was humming. It was doing some nice things today, but it was just about finishing drives, and they couldn't do that. But on the front of just same issues plaguing this team, it was there's so much truth in that when it comes to how this game was lost. And the first thing I look at across the aisle at the Saints is just how Taysom Hill, who's kind of the Swiss Army knife player, had one of the best games of his career, getting 206 yards from scrimmage today as both a pass catcher. He even threw some passes today, and a runner. He scored 3 touchdowns, and really the dagger of a touchdown, a 75-yard touchdown run late in the fourth quarter that put the game completely out of reach. And it was funny, like he was the guy who almost gave the game away for the Saints. He committed 2 turnovers. One of them as a quarterback, he threw a pick, and then the other one he fumbled on another drive that showed some promise for New Orleans. And it was like, those are 2 backbreaking mistakes by him. But in the end, it didn't matter, because he was also the guy that came up when you needed it most to single-handedly win you the game, if you were New Orleans. So and the team talked all week about sort of honing in on him, and Alvin Kamara was the other one to certainly be aware of, and just the threats that those 2 guys posed. And they had no answers for Taysom Hill all day. It was a lot of the same sort of designed. He'd line up at quarterback keepers where he would just run and, you know, make some plays. And we know everybody knew he was super talented. They knew what he could do, but it was the Browns just not really being ready for it. And the Browns missing a bunch of tackles, which has been a problem that's plagued them all season long. And to see that continue today, especially off of the bye week, was just another, just the latest kind of backbreaking mistakes that we've seen. And it's a broken record at this point, right? Like, we're talking about this team, and it's the same exact conversation each week. It's missed tackles, it's missed opportunities, it's not finishing, it's just too many mistakes, and that's what happens when you're 2-8. Those are the characteristics of a 2-8 team. So I don't know that it's like, there's no sense in like sitting here talking about like, where do they go from here, and like, where's the like what. And I do think it's interesting because on some level that conversation is interesting, because you do have to think about in terms of the future. You know, Kevin Stefanski made it clear this week that their goals 1 through 100 are still to win football games. And I think from his perspective as the coach of this team, that's 100% true. But at the same time, like the organization is going to be checking those like the standings in terms of where they fit and where they might end up in the draft and where they're going to be, so they can start sort of figuring those things out. And that's kind of what the rest of the season was already about. But now it's brought even more spotlight on that, and you continue to see the problems that they have and the holes that they have to fill. And it feels pretty daunting to have to come back from all this. In a year where there was such high expectations for it to crash down so horrifically as it has, is frustrating and disappointing and all of the above. There was also another disappointing moment from today in the form of Dawand Jones going down with a season-ending, as Kevin Stefanski confirmed after the game, fracture in his left leg. He wasn't really ready to clarify if it was an ankle, if it was just higher on the leg, if it was something else. But he did say it was a fracture. He'd give more information on that tomorrow when he meets with the media. But not a great situation in that regard. And I talk about evaluating this team moving forward. That's one of the biggest areas that you were hoping to sort of get a clear picture on as the rest of the season went with Dawand Jones at that position. And it was a little bit of friendly fire. Wyatt Teller kind of got blocked backwards and ended up basically sort of getting tangled up with Dawand Jones, and that's what led to the fracture. And so he felt bad afterwards that it was kind of a mistake, not even a mistake, but it was just like the developing of the play allowed him to kind of get in the path of Dawand and cause the injury. But as far as it concerns the Browns, like short term, yeah, it stinks. Like you lose the guy that had been playing pretty well at left tackle, started the last 3 games for Jedrick Wills, who was obviously out a couple weeks back, and then kept the job because he played so well. And now, like, that's the short-term ramifications of this. But the long-term ramifications of this are that as you start thinking about evaluation for this team and where do they go from here, what players are they going to be, what positions, rather, are they going to be trying to draft? If you had tackle on that list, well, I think you were hoping that Dawand Jones maybe gave you a clear answer on if you actually need to pursue a tackle early on in this draft or not. And so the fact that you now don't have him the rest of the season, 7 games to go, to really get a clear picture of if he can be your tackle of the future, it sort of makes that position still sort of a little bit of a mystery here going into next year. And so maybe that is still something that they're going to have to address. The fracture will not keep him out. I mean, he'll be back well before next season. Fractures don't take that long to keep a guy off the field. A good example of that is Zach Zinter, who broke his leg against Ohio State last year, and he was ready, obviously, for training, for even spring training camp and beyond. So it's not that it's going to keep him out for the start of the season, and maybe they'll be able to evaluate a little bit more in the offseason. But game tape is always the number one thing you're going to want to look at and utilize when you're sort of assessing a situation of where a guy fits and what a guy can bring to the table. So you lose that now, and maybe that keeps that as a big question mark, a big area of need for this team. Maybe they'll just roll with Dawand Jones because they felt good about how he played in this 3-game stretch. It's going to be a lot of that. Like, it's going to be a lot of guessing and piecemealing, I think, to sort of put this roster back together and be able to overcome some of the salary cap restrictions that they're going to have, just given some of the massive contracts that they've handed out. And it's whether or not Andrew Berry's here to sort those things out remains to be seen. But it is going to be whoever the GM, Andrew Berry or otherwise, is. It's going to be their task. They're going to be tasked with a lot of different things to sort of sort this mess out. And tackle is going to be at the forefront of that, whether it's Dawand Jones or otherwise. So it stinks that he gets hurt. You lose that. Whether who starts on Thursday is going to be a question mark. Jermaine Ifedi filled in for him the rest of the game when he went down. But on top of that, you had Jedrick Wills was ruled out for this game after he tweaked the knee that's been bothering him this season on Saturday. And Kevin Stefanski said there's a possibility that he could play this week. Now, the problem is it's a short week. Browns will be hosting the Steelers on Thursday night. We'll be sure at some point this week to give you the line for that game. When we talk to Eric here coming up on Tuesday leading up to it, we'll have the lines for you courtesy of our friends at BetOnline. You can head over to BetOnline, obviously, each week of the NFL season and bet on the spreads, the money lines, the over-under, and much, much more. We appreciate their support of all the podcasts here at the Believe Network, and obviously encourage you to go find all their post-game opportunities that they have, whether it's the slot machines, betting on other sports. They have NHL, NBA, etc. You can find all that available to you with Bet Online. Bet Online, the game starts here. But yeah, short week for the Browns, and they obviously will be hosting the Steelers on Thursday, and that's always a tougher task when you got the short week to work with to get yourself physically ready. So we'll see what that means for Jedrick Wills. We'll see what that means for some of these other players and how this kind of week progresses. But they have some things to sort out, including Dustin Hopkins, who missed 2 field goals today. Really, he missed 3 field goals, but only 2 of them counted because 2 of them came on the same drive, really 3 plays apart. Right before the half, he missed a 32-yarder. And then there was a penalty that gave the Browns sort of a second chance with like 12 seconds left in the half to try to take a couple shots at the end zone. And then he missed again from 27 yards. And that's on top of a 51-yarder that he missed earlier in the game, which those 50-plus yarders last year were his bread and butter. He was 8 for 8 from 50-plus yards in 2023. And this year, he's now only 4 for 8. And it's another thing on the list of things of problems that this team has experienced that you didn't think were problems. They thought they had their kicker figured out. They thought they had Dustin Hopkins sort of settled as the kicker they've been longing for since the Phil Dawson days. And it has blown up in their face in a way this year because he struggled so much and he hasn't been as consistent as he was a year ago. Now, he said at halftime, he sort of talked through some things and he thinks he knows what he has to do differently. It's not about practice. It's not about anything he's changed with his process. He just thinks he has to do some things slightly differently, and that if he had gotten a second chance or another chance in the second half to kick a field goal, he felt like he would have been. He felt pretty good about it. He thought he would have had been able to actually make them, and he sorted all those things out. We'll have to wait till Thursday to see if that's the truth or not. But he's got some things to work through, as do the special teams in general, because special teams this year under Bubba Ventrone have not been very good. Whether it's the opponents running back long kickoffs. There was a long punt return today for the Saints by Dante Pettis, who set the Saints up for a short little field that led to a touchdown drive. And on the flip side, it feels like the Browns aren't getting those big impact plays in special teams, whether it's the kickoffs, whether it's the punt or the kickoff returns, the punt returns, and then you have your kicker missing kicks. So that's been a mess too. But it's again part of that list of the same problems that have occurred throughout the season. It's special teams. It's missed tackles. It's just costly mistakes at the worst possible times. It's bad play calls in certain situations that they're not converting. It's just compounding and compounding and compounding, and thus you have a 2-8 season that's blown up in your face after what was supposed to be a year of high expectations and so many different things that this team was supposed to accomplish. That's all gone up in smoke, and it just continued here in Week 11. One last thought I wanted to kind of get to here because I saw Ken Fang of Awful Announcing, who is a Browns fan. He posted about just how miserable it is to be a Cleveland Browns fan. I think the example he referenced that being a Browns fan is worse than being a Red Sox fan before 2004. Now, I can actually speak to this because I was a Red Sox. I am a Red Sox fan. I know that's blasphemy to be covering Cleveland teams and be a Red Sox fan. There's a long story with it. I'll share it at another time. This is not the setting for it. But I don't necessarily think I was younger then. So I don't know that I experienced being like a tortured Red Sox fan. I really had like a couple years there, and like 2003 was the one that was really torturous for me, that some of these other longtime diehard Red Sox fans did. But I can assure you that was a miserable experience for all those people, and they went a very, very long time without winning much of anything. But that said, I do sympathize with Browns fans because I see it. I live it. I live in Cleveland. I have a family in Cleveland. Like, I'm interacting with fans on a daily basis, and I know the misery that you guys go through on Sundays. And I think the Red Sox run where they went 86 years without a title, there was some eeriness to it, and certainly felt like there was a curse there. But like, it feels like the moments that really the curse kind of reared its ugly head over that long span of time are few and far between to the number of times that the Browns just create different ways to lose. And that's maybe the best way I can sum it up. It's like the Browns find new ways to – it's almost like hard to believe. Like every time you think you've seen it all with this team, they find another way to just like let you down and lose a game and not come out with a win. And I know that tortures you guys, and I know it's been miserable to follow, especially in a season, like I said, that had some high expectations. You thought this franchise was finally turning the corner. You had to live through 1-31 for 2 seasons with Hugh Jackson at the helm, to get to a point where you thought your team was going to be continually and consistently competitive and making the playoffs and doing all these great things. And we thought they had turned that corner in 2020, took a step back. We thought they turned it last year with the great magical Joe Flacco run. And it's all blown up in their face yet again. And as we sit here after week 11, I'm left with the same sort of overarching thought as many of you, which is there's more questions than answers about this team moving forward and how they're going to dig themselves out of this mess that they're in of a salary cap situation and a team that we thought was very talented and clearly has a lot of holes to fill. All those things will have to start to sort of bear themselves out over the weeks and months ahead, going into the offseason. And of course, we'll be here to discuss them with you moving forward. I look forward to picking Eric's brain on what transpired today on our midweek episode of the podcast. He's not going to be happy, by the way. We know that about Eric. He doesn't like when the Browns do him wrong. And by do him wrong, I mean when he picks them to win and then they let him down and they lose. That's like the number one way to make Eric upset. And I don't like when Eric's upset. It makes sure a good content on the show because he's a little more fiery. But I don't like upsetting Eric. So hopefully we'll get through it together. We'll talk through it with you guys. And we do appreciate your viewership and your listenership always to the Dog Chick Podcast. That's going to do it for me, live from the Caesars Superdome here in New Orleans. I will talk to you guys again back home in Cleveland later this week. Browns fall today, 35-14. And again, more questions than answers for this team as they keep on rolling into a short Week 12. Steelers coming to town on Thursday. We'll be there to talk about it with you, of course, on the Dog Check Podcast, part of the Believe Network of podcasts and airing weekly on a television set near you throughout the great state of Ohio. Take it easy, guys, and as always, go Browns.